In today's video, I'm going to be talking about a particular so-called quack medicine that was invented way back in the beginning of the 1900s, I should say. And it's got some very scary facts about it, and I'm going to go into that just in a minute. But before we get into this video, we'll rattle off all the rubbish that I always do. If you like this kind of content, like and subscribe. I do lots of scary facts, conspiracy videos, and I also draw art along with it, horrific art to do with the subject that I am talking about. So the medicine in question that I'm going to be talking about is Radithor. Now, Radithor was a so-called medicine that was created in 1918 to 1928 by Bailey Radium Laboratories in East Orange, New Jersey. The owner of the company, William J. A. Bailey, was a college dropout and was not a medical doctor. He labelled Radithor a cure for the living dead, and it was very expensive, costing $1 for a 2-ounce bottle, which is 60 ml. $1 in our day and age right now, if you were talking in US dollars, it would be about 17 US. If I worked in Australian dollars, where I am, it would cost $30 in this day and age, which is, quite expensive for a 60 ml bottle of this stuff. Bailey also stated that his medicine wouldn't harm anyone. It was said to cure impotence, give you energy, feeling of well-being, strength, injury recovery, cure insomnia, and hysteria. But now, here's the kicker. Radithor contained distilled water with radium. It contained 1 microcurie of both Ra-226 and Ra-228, which are both radioactive components. Now, I have no idea how to even begin to understand microcuries. I actually did some research on comparing it to something that I could understand, and sorry. I honestly didn't understand it. If you could explain it to me a little bit better, that would be great, because I just have no idea. I couldn't understand any of the pages that I visited. Ra-226 was used in paint for timepieces and compasses during World War I and lasted 1600 years before decaying. Now, Ra-228 was also used in paints and iodine, but it only lasted for 5 years before decaying. Still bad? Still bad. This bottle of sunshine was only taken by the wealthy, as they were the only ones that could afford it back then. So thank our lucky stars that this was never a public issue and became kind of like an epidemic of people taking this particular product. The most well-known customer of Radithor was a wealthy socialite named Eben Byers. Byers was a US amateur golfer champion and the president of A.M. Byers Company in Pittsburgh, which was one of the largest steel companies in the world. And apparently he had inherited from this company from his father. And Byers was a pretty big deal back then. He was quite famous and people knew who he was. In 1927, Byers was on a train where he injured himself. So basically he fell out of a bed. He fell out and injured his arm following a football game with his buddies. When he got home, he found that his arm wasn't healing quick enough. So being, he was about 50, around the 50-year mark, probably very late 40s at this point in time. He decided to go and visit his doctor for help. His doctor, named C.C. Moyer, prescribed him Radithor, and because he was wealthy, he could afford it, so that's why he prescribed it to him. He was only supposed to take 1 teaspoon a day, but Byers started feeling so good that he started taking 1 bottle a day. He did this for a couple of months. Now, apparently Radithor was something that worked pretty quickly, but they weren't too sure if it was a placebo effect. So then, after a couple of months, Byers moved to taking 2 bottles, drinking 2 bottles a day. And then after a year, he decided to take 3 bottles a day. He then contacted the company and started ordering crates of this shit. He consumed 3 bottles a day for 2 years. He gave cases to his colleagues, girlfriends, because he was a bit of a womanizer, friends, family, even gave it to his racehorse. He just loved the shit. He was really just an advocate for it. In 1930, Byers stopped taking Radithor after his teeth started falling out. Then, Byers' bottom jaw just fell off. He was rotting from the inside out, and the tissue and bone was just disintegrating. Byers had to have the rest of his jaw removed. Only 2 front teeth remained on his upper jaw. His bones and tissue were disintegrating, and he had holes in his skull that were exposing his brain. And the scary thing was, he didn't feel much pain because his nerves were basically non-existent. It was a very gruesome sight for Robert Wynne to witness, which was a Federal Trade Commission attorney who was sent to Byers' home to interview him to make a case against Bailey and his company. He said that when Byers opened the door, he had bandages wrapped around his head, which basically was holding his skull intact, because apparently his skull had cracked open and was gaping open, and a lot of his brain was exposed, so he had to be bandaged up. And Byers could barely talk as well, as you could imagine. Byers ended up having surgery to install a jaw that was made for him. It was surgically attached, but this sort of really was just a band-aid for what was happening, because he was still just deteriorating. I will have on the screen of what he looked like with the jaw, which I presume he would have had when he was being interviewed by Robert Wynne, the attorney, and he's an absolute mess there. Byers died at the age of 51 on the 31st of March 1932 from a combination of radiation poisoning, blood diseases, abscences of the brain, and pneumonia. He basically suffered until his death. Now, I will show you what Byers looked like a couple of days. Apparently this photo was allegedly taken a couple of days before he died, and it's quite graphic, so beware. Now, Byers may have been okay if he would have took the recommended dosage, but the amount that he was drinking was just pure insanity. He had consumed over 1,400 bottles. He was buried in a lead coffin because his body was so radioactive. Bailey's company was shut down, and in 1965, Byers' body was exhumed to be studied. He was still extremely radioactive at the same amount of radiation that he was buried at. Because you got to remember that because it had the Ra-226 in it, which does not decay for 1,600 years, his body is still going to be radioactive for quite some time. I will get to the amounts and the radiation levels of Eben's body later on. Another famous case was the Radium Girls. A group of female factory workers in New Jersey were working at United States Radium Factory from 1917 to 1930. These girls got radiation poisoning from painting clocks and watch dials with radium-infused paints, which was glow in the dark. Well, that's what made it glow in the dark, was the radium. They were told that the paint was harmless, so they would lick the ends of their paintbrushes to get a more pointed end for the paint. Some of the girls would even paint their fingernails, teeth with this glow-in-the-dark paint. Some would even wear their nice dresses into work to get this paint dust on it, so then when they went to the dances that night, their dresses would glow in the dark. But it didn't take long for the girls to suffer from severe headaches and excruciating pain in their jaws, exactly like Byers. So the girls knew Byers' symptoms and what he was going through when it all came out, and they saw Byers' news report. They knew straight away that he had radiation poisoning just like them. In 1928, 5 girls filed a lawsuit against their employer, winning in 1938. One woman named Molly, who was the first death from the radiation poisoning at the company, started getting toothaches and had to have them removed. But where her teeth used to be, ulcers started to form and they started to bleed and pus. She also had to have her lower jaw removed after the ulcers spread. Now this is where it gets horrifying. Molly took a trip to the dentist, and I think it was one of the last times that she went back to the dentist. And the dentist accidentally broke her jaw. And basically he just lifted her jaw out of her mouth because everything had just disintegrated. That's terrifying. So basically from there she had to be rushed into surgery for this to be dealt with. Unfortunately, Molly died on the 12th of September 1922 from hemorrhaging in her throat. So basically she died from her throat and that just filling up with blood from these horrible ulcers that were forming. And the sad thing, she was only 24 years old. And the other Radium girls started going the same way, with horrible, agonizing symptoms. More than 50 girls had died in correlation to the radium paint. If the girls didn't die via the same ulcer-ridden jaws and that Molly did, it was from a massive cancerous bone tumors that grew anywhere on the body. It was estimated that over 400,000 bottles were sold between 1925 and 1931, but only 80 users have been linked to radiation death. Bailey died in 1949 at the age of 64 years old of carcinoma of the bladder. His body was exhumed in 1970 and was found to be radioactive as well, so it looks like he was taking his own product as well and suffered the same fate. Apparently Byers' body contained 36 micrograms of radiation at the time of his death. Now apparently 10 micrograms is fatal to a human, so it was pretty bad. When Byers' body was exhumed, it was apparently the same amount. It was 36 micrograms. So Radithor then became banned in the US by the end of 1932, but unfortunately no one ended up being charged for Byers' death. All I can say is thank God this shit is not around anymore, because people were literally falling apart. Bones would honeycomb and become weak. Like, that's terrifying. This was just an absolutely horrific so-called medicine. I would never call it that. But the illustration that I did for this video today is of a basically radioactive Radithor monster that represents the horrible things that this particular so-called medicine represents. Like, it's a monster who is deteriorating. He's got no insides left. He's just being basically eaten from the inside out, just disintegrated, and the only thing that's left is a little bit of esophagus, a bit of a nerve running down the spines, some kidneys, and some of the intestines are even coming out. Basically, the skin has been slowly being eaten away at the front. He's got holes all around him, holes in the brain, no bottom jaw, which seemed to be a big symptom. Yeah, of what would happen to people on this shit. Like, it just, I don't know, it just seemed to just go straight to the jaw first. Yeah, and bottles of Radithor just laying around on the floor because this thing had just consumed all these bottles of Radithor. And there's also, I did very faint, in the background you'll see of some Radithor, however you say it, bottles in the background, just going back into the distance as this monster has just consumed so much and has just destroyed, it's just destroyed him. So yeah, horrible stuff. Let me know if you know of any other stories to do with this. I know there is quite a few out there, but I just wanted to cover the main ones, especially Eben Byers. Like, that is one horrific story. Like, that one I learnt about probably about a year or so ago, and when I saw the photo of him, it actually disturbed me for a couple of days. I'm now desensitized to it, which is good, but it's just, that is horrible. Absolutely just horrible that this has happened to peoples. Let me know of any other Radium, Radithor stories or whatever that you, just put them down in the description below. I will go and check them out. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, learning about this horrible medicine, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!